I've just come out the shower, and that reminded me that for many years people have been going on about saving the planet and how we can reduce our carbon footprint. And you get all these different methods and ways people are describing how you can reduce your carbon footprint. And it normally revolves around things like cars and what you eat and plastic packaging and all that kind of thing. But something that immediately occurred to me as soon as people started talking about this kind of thing was the fact that I've never really been one for needing to shower every day. I'm quite a sedentary person. I don't do a lot of physical activity, and as a result I don't tend to generate too much sweat on a daily basis. Obviously there's a little bit. No matter what you do, you're generating sweat, your body's pumping out stuff from the sweat glands or whatever. And unless you're walking around naked in the snow, generally any form of heat's going to produce a little bit of sweat. But being sedentary, it's not that much. And so I thought, well, surely the best and easiest way to reduce the amount of stuff you consume on a daily basis is simply just to shower or bathe every other day. Instead of every day, every other day. It doesn't take a genius of maths to figure out that 50% of 365 is quite a lot of stuff. That's half the amount of water, half the amount of energy required to heat the water, half the amount of deodorant you use after the shower, and modern deodorants can tend to last up to about 48 hours. You know, if you're leading a quite sedentary life. Probably longer. Half the amount of shower gel or shampoo or conditioner or body wash or soap or whatever it is you use. And half the number of times you have to put your towel in the washing machine. And then if you're the kind of person who changes clothing after the shower, which is most people I suppose, maybe not everybody but most people, obviously that halves the amount of times you're using the washing machine for your clothes in a year. And all the reduced water and heat that would involve as well. And so that is a massive amount of carbon footprint removal. Obviously if people engage in very physical activity and get themselves really sweaty in the space of a few hours, then sure, you know, you've got to do what you've got to do. If that's your lifestyle and you continue showering every day, that's fine. I'm not talking about creating peer pressure here to force people to have some kind of cleanliness regime. But even if just half the people in the country, and I should think about half the people in the country probably do lead very sedentary lives at least, maybe more. And all this halving would have a massive communal impact. Some days, like for example, if you've got, you know, a couple of days off, a weekend for example, you could have your shower on Friday morning. That'll last you to Sunday morning. But then if you're not meeting anybody on Sunday, you're just staying at home and again being very, very sedentary, having a traditional Sunday of doing naff all, then you could push it to 3 days and nobody would really notice or care. And so the grand total over the course of a whole year is probably a bit more than 50%, probably closer to about 55%. But isn't it amazing whenever you hear all this chatter and propaganda and pressure and peer pressure and all this kind of thing about reducing our carbon footprint? Nobody ever mentions something quite so simple and easy and common sense as this. And you think, why is that? And it's this kind of thing that makes you a little bit paranoid, in that maybe the things they're suggesting are more agenda-based than actual carbon-based. I mean, it wouldn't take much effort just to have a national recommendation that the government-approved amount of washing that a human needs to do is approximately once every 48 hours rather than once every 24 hours. And yeah, sure, I suppose some people might get a bit pongy at the end of their 48 hours, in the last few hours or whatever. But I've never really noticed anybody be that pongy after 48 hours, unless they've been doing a lot of physical activity, or in other ways keeping themselves unusually hot. And I suppose there's a problem with sex, of course. Some people like to have sex every day, maybe twice a day, blah, 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 etc., etc. You know, sex creates smells, but then you can, just washing your privates just tends to do that. You can do that in a sink. You don't need to run a bath or run a shower. Just because you've had sex, you don't need to run in the shower, you know, sort of like end up showering 3 times a day if you're a nymphomaniac or whatever. But yeah, anyway, just have a government guideline of, we expect and hope that people generally stick to a 48-hour cleaning regime, and please don't mind if some people get a bit pongy towards the end of their second day. And as if by magic, you've radically reduced the amount of water, energy and aerosols and soaps and all these other things, all with very little effort. You know, very little public pushback, really. I think once people have tried and experimented with 48 hours, once they've braved that first 24 hours and thought, fuck yeah, I'm not going to have a shower today, I'm just going to see what happens, see how bad I end up smelling. Give it a whirl. Most people realise that no, they can go 48 hours quite easily. And it's normally just when you sleep at night that you do most of your sweating, and that's why people tend to have showers in the morning. But generally speaking, you don't create too much sweat overnight. You don't go to bed clean and wake up a stinking mass. And I just think it would be nice if somebody could actually promote this idea after 20 years or 30 years or 40 years of hearing about this problem. Well, pretty much all my life, I suppose. And yet something I do is never mentioned by any of them. Or if it is, it's in the sidelines, because, you know, got to make it seem like we do actually care. We have mentioned it, you know, but it's not a government guideline, you know, not like changing all the cars or, you know, all these other schemes that tend to involve taxation and fines and all that kind of thing. You wouldn't need fines if somebody's a bit pongy, you don't fine them. It's just sort of make it part of the culture, really, the unspoken culture. I'm trying to think who might want to prevent this from becoming culture, and you've only really got the soap makers, the deodorant makers, the water company and the energy companies. And I feel sure the soap companies won't go bankrupt if people are using half the amount of shower gel and half the amount of deodorant. Especially as most deodorants nowadays say on the packet, you know, last 48 hours by me. And I can't imagine the water companies complaining if people use less water, because people tend to pay a flat fee for the amount of water, you know. But as far as I'm aware, water companies would be delighted if we use less water. Similarly with the energy companies, I would have thought they'd be delighted if people use a bit less energy. So I'm struggling to see why there'd be any industrial side pushback or prevention of this message getting out. But you never know. Maybe it is. Maybe the L'Oreal would get really angry and, you know, target politicians with negativity if they promoted this idea. And when I mention politicians, you've got to be very careful. I've got to stress this enough. It can't be a rule. It can't involve tax. It can't involve fines. It's just, it ought to be government guidelines of expectation.